Bamtarde, welcome, greetings, Akwaba. Happy Sunday. We hope you are reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength today on this Sunday. We want to honor for those that commemorated all of the mothers in spirit and whatever way you identify being a mother. We want to honor you, not because the capitalist system says today is that day, but just because we should be honoring you every day anyway. So since everyone's focused on it right now, we'll certainly, that's one that's worthwhile. We'll certainly say that it's something that we need to pay special focus and attention to. We thank you for joining our Ancestors' Voices. We're going to talk about the situation in the Sudan today, a very traumatic situation happening to our people in Sudan and Central North Africa. So we're going to talk about that. We thank you for joining us. As always, we give thanks and honor to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. They are the rightful caretakers of this land. Of course, I was in this small town, rural town this morning, and they had a lot of shops on the streets in the downtown, so-called downtown portion of this town. And they all had native something, and they, had some sort of merchandise that was derived from the indigenous people's culture, not an indigenous person in sight anywhere. And it just made me think, again, like the trauma and suffering of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere is everywhere around us. If our eyes are open, we should be able to always see it. And so we recognize that, and we acknowledge it, and we give them as much positive energy as we can to continue their struggle. They are out here waging that struggle, and we continue to support them in their efforts to do so. And by the same token, we honor and support our African ancestors, the people who came before us, who laid the pathway for us to be here today. Also, everywhere you look around, if your eyes are open, you see that suffering as well. You see what we encountered. And no matter how strong these people try to deny that history of trauma and oppression against us, it's here. It happened. It was real. And we are the living vestiges of it. So no matter how much they try to deny it, we don't pay any attention to that. We know that we have one responsibility, and that's to continue to honor the legacy of dignity that our ancestors passed on to us. So we honor them for all of their suffering and sacrifice to allow us to be here, because they knew that we would have the opportunity to make a better world for our people and all of humanity. And we certainly are going to do everything we can not to disappoint them. So we thank you for joining us again. We're going to talk about what's going on in the Sudan today. And we start, as we always do, just simply by providing our introduction, our Ancestors' Voices. This program is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party, which is based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, that is our objective, that's our goal. And we define Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa. We do not define Pan-Africanism as quote unquote Black people uniting. We do not define Pan-Africanism as African folks in the Western world, primarily the United States, being able to go to Africa. Pan-Africanism certainly involves repatriation, folks that want to return to Africa, but that is not the central focus of our movement. It is to uplift and rebuild the African continent, seize it from the hands of neo-colonialism and imperialism, which have strangled Africa, and to give its vast natural resources back to the masses of African people worldwide, where it rightfully belongs. And that's the problem in the Sudan and all over Africa and all over the African world. So that's why we see Pan-Africanism as the solution to that challenge. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined pretty consistently in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, written by Kwame Nkrumah, one of the founders of the APRP in 1968. And that book outlines that strategy as simply one of uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African forces on the ground throughout Africa who agree in our objective and definition of Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa. So that, you all, is our work. And this particular program, one of many within the APRP, is sponsored every Sunday at the same time, Our Ancestors' Voices. It's hosted by myself, Ajamu, and Shakura, who is my biological daughter, and both of us are active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So again, we thank you for joining us. This important topic, giving an update and analysis on what's happening in Sudan. And to get us started, I turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us. We are a little over a week away from African Liberation Day, so we definitely want to still ask humbly for you all's donations. Again, we have in-person events that are happening all around the world, as well as a virtual broadcast that will take place internationally. And so again, we ask for your donations. Please keep in mind, some of the funds are going towards helping people to travel to these different locations. Some of the funds are going to the tech services that we're going to be using, translation services, printing of awards, making sure that facilities are intact so that folks can be able to host events there and whatnot, especially in some of the countries at home where we may or may not already have a working chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, but yet we're still trying to branch out and to build more of a organization and work study place in these different countries that don't have our presence there yet. So again, your money is not just going to some event. This is literally one of the biggest institutions that we celebrate within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And we celebrate it because it promotes exactly what we stand for. This is an event where we can connect with Africans all over the world, and we can all talk about concepts and ideas that are affecting Africa and destabilizing Africa, and then develop ways where we can figure out A, why joining an organization is most important, and B, why increasing political education will help us achieve one unified socialist Africa, which means we will get control and we will get our land back. It is already in the works and it has been happening. And as many of the comrades in the organization say, victory is certain. So in order to do that, we have to celebrate that Africans everywhere need to liberate together, and that we as African people need to liberate Mother Africa. And so we ask you to donate to www.abetterworld.me. Again, www.abetterworld.me. And please make sure you share that link. If you have other folks who like supporting African businesses or social justice movements, we as an organization wouldn't really call ourselves a business, but we are a Pan-Africanist organization. And so if you have folks that like donating to causes such as that, then we definitely would ask you to share the link so that we can continue to get the word out. This particular ALD is going to be one that you should not miss. So in addition to you donating, make sure that you are paying attention to your email blast. We have a flyer that's already been circulating. We are on a move, and Africa will not be free until we work tirelessly to get there. So we definitely want to encourage you not only to donate, but to also participate. And we'll be speaking about African Liberation Day next week, as a matter of fact, for our next seminar topic. So stay tuned for that. As far as today is concerned, I just first think that as an organization, we need to continue to push the envelope and really help people understand that the only problem that Africans need to understand is affecting them in their lives is imperialism. And you can tie imperialism to capitalism and then really start to make an argument that those two things together have made living conditions deplorable. They have made economic conditions deplorable for Africans. They have made social constructs and the way we are perceived in society absolutely dehumanizing, to the point where any problem that we face, whether it's inadequate water, whether it's not being able to afford clothes, having issues with our child's education system, not being able to maintain a job, having systems of oppression that we have to fight every single day, having colonizers that we have to fight every single day, reminding people that it's okay for us to take back our land, helping people understand that Africans do not equate to having power in our society, and helping people understand that the reason we know that to be true is because we don't even control the resources that are produced from Africa. So if we don't produce, if we don't control the resources that are produced, and when I say we don't control, I mean, you and I on this Zoom right now, no one's going to call us in 5 hours or in 8 hours when it's morning time in Ghana or Senegal and say, yeah, we're able to get some new cacao picked off the trees, or we just figured out another way to clean the gold from the Ivory Coast. What do you want us to do with the shipments? Like, no one is calling me to ask me that, because my opinion does not matter, because I am not from the elite British part of the world, or maybe I'm not Portuguese, or maybe I'm not French, or maybe I'm not Spanish, whatever that may be. And so because I'm not a European colonizer, my opinion about my own homeland does not matter. It stopped mattering the moment that I lost the ability to control what happened to Africa. And I would say that for many of us, that's what happened, because we are suffering from colonization. Whether you want to admit it or not, if you descend from Africa, meaning if you consider yourself Black, if you consider yourself Afro-American, if you consider yourself Afro-Cuban, if you consider yourself of African descent, whatever that looks like, that means that you descend from the continent, which means this is just as much your problem as it is mine. Because the moment that Africa stopped being one that we can control and determine how those resources are used, then that meant that we as Africans lost power. And so therefore, that means that all of the problems that we have exist because imperialism, a systematic system of oppression that causes one country to be in control of another, or in this case, in control of a whole continent, if you will, that causes us to not be able to determine, to dictate, to have any decision making that affects how we do that. And imperialism usually occurs through one of three ways. It could be political, it could be military, or it could be economic. And so I think it's important to connect those dots. And when I say imperialism, don't forget about capitalism. That's the other part of the leg that needs to be addressed. And so we have to think about how both of these systems have worked tirelessly to get us to the position we're in, where we're not valued as human beings, where we don't matter, where we're insignificant, where people have to literally fight to remind one another that colonized people, their lives matter on a day-to-day basis. And we have to fight. And that's why we connect with other people who are colonized. That's why we fight with people who have lost their land or have been kicked out of their land. This is why we are in solidarity with occupied Palestine and with the Palestinian people, because we understand that the only difference is we were removed from our land, whereas they were removed gradually and now told that they can't even go back. But yet everybody is, very upset about what happened to the Jewish people. And yes, that's a tragedy within itself, but two rights don't make a wrong. Just because you were displaced doesn't mean you displaced someone else. And so this is why we're in solidarity with the indigenous people. This is why, if you are have been listening to any of the seminars, specifically the ones around Unthanksgiving, why we talk in great detail, A, about why we call it Unthanksgiving, and B, how we would spend our time on that particular day doing nothing but acknowledging the indigenous people. Because if anybody understands what it means to have their land taken, they have. And then, we have to even break down like how much of them have suffered, all the way from the top of the Canadian lands, all the way down to Chile. All the way down to Chile. They have been suffering and had that removed from them. And people have the nerve to question them and question why they're here. They're here because this is their land. Why are you here? And at least Africans who have sense and who have increased political education, at least some of us understand we're here because we've been kidnapped. At least we understand we're not here because it's a choice. But that means you have to really increase your political education to even understand that. Because unfortunately, some of us think we're just here because this is where we were born. And there's so much more to that story. If only it were that simple. There's so much more to that story. So again, capitalism and imperialism have caused us to be where we are. And I would say that has been the strongest link that has allowed Africa to be in the detriment that it is in today. But there's something that we can do to change that. We can have the power to change that, but we need to make some different decisions moving forward if we want to do anything to help slow down this process and to help save not only Sudan, but other countries that are suffering similarly or about to suffer similarly, and to really help neo-colonizers understand this is our land and you're not going to take it. You're not going to take it anymore. You may be here now, but you will be leaving. We're going to help you figure out how you need to get out and go, because you can't stay here anymore. We get to determine how these resources are spent and used. We get to determine how our economic system is built. We get to write the curriculum for our children to go to schools, because we want them to learn from a socialist perspective how to eradicate class divide and how to increase humanity. That's what we get to decide as African people. We have been through so much, and we get to take our control back. We will get the power that we have been deserving, because we understand that Africa deserves to be free. And I think once all of those things come together, then it's going to be very difficult for anyone to try to threaten us, but that's going to take some time. Next slide, please. So in the process of while that time is manifesting itself, as I just said, there's things that we can be doing to address that. First and foremost, please don't forget to donate to African Liberation Day, because believe it or not, you donating to African Liberation Day helps to build the All African People's Revolutionary Party. The second thing you can do is join an organization that's working for justice. Now, if you don't want to join an organization that's working for justice, that's fine. That's your prerogative, although we really could use your people power. But if you don't want to join, maybe you're not ready, or maybe you mentally can't handle it, you don't have the capacity, then that means you should donate even more to African Liberation Day, because the most you can do right now is donate instead of physical labor. Then that's the least you can do, is to do that. Because if you can't do the physical labor yourself, you can at least support other people who are working tirelessly to do it. You can support the fact that, I'm not sure who our keynote speaker is this year, but last year we had a 24-year-old keynote speaker at home on the continent. And they needed a translator, because I unfortunately wasn't colonized to speak Portuguese, so I didn't understand what this comrade was saying. But let me tell you, this comrade was lighting fire under me. Here in Memphis, Tennessee, I was watching this person on screen, and I started crying, because this person is 24 and understands that there is so much work to be done. I mean, you can't watch a single ALD broadcast and not be humbled by the time it's over and done. There's just no way. And so when we talk about ALD, we're talking about trying to eradicate the issues that Sudan is currently facing. That's what we're talking about. These are not mutually exclusive. African Liberation Day literally benefits all African countries, and the entire continent is going to be impacted by ALD each and every year that it takes place, because that means we can reach more people each year and help them understand, A, that they are African and they need to accept that, and B, they have a responsibility to help Africa be free. That's the bottom line. Now, however you decide to do that, whether you join an organization that's working for justice, whether you increase your political education, that's up to you. That's up to you. Personally, I don't understand how we could go about doing anything without information. That would be really very backwards, if you ask me. Like, we need more information so that we can understand what we're up against. And it's not like colonization just happened last night. Like, this has been going on for 600 plus years. So that means we have a lot of research to do so that we can really understand what we're up against. I mean, that's just common sense, but neither here nor there. Donate to ALD at www.abetterworld.me. Again, www.abetterworld.me. I also want to say, as I said before, there are things we can do to address what is currently happening and how imperialism and capitalism have affected us. And so part of how they've affected us is by causing us to be reminded, and by reminding society, that we not only are seen and perceived as being powerless, but other people can treat us with disrespect because we are powerless. We do not deserve respect. That has been another social construct that has manifested itself and really determine the outcome that we experience. This, of course, leads to us being disorganized. We're disorganized mentally. We don't even know who we are. I just said, if you identify as Black or African American or Afro-Cuban, or we have all these terms to pick when we're registering for tests, or registering for a driver's license, or registering to vote. Unfortunately, we have all these terms about who we are. And guess what? We didn't create none of them. The colonizer created all of them. But we don't even understand that that's not even us. We're using somebody else's language and terms to define who we are as a people. That's how broken and backwards we are. Bravo, colonization. You have won again. So we need to do something about that, you all. That's why we're disorganized mentally. We don't even know who we are. If we don't know who we are, then how are we going to know where we came from? That is impossible. Impossible. So we have to understand disorganization mentally, disorganization physically. We're not doing what needs to be done so that Africa can be free. Understanding that capitalism is the problem, but then going out and supporting more capitalist holidays is not the solution. If anything, this is not me telling you how to spend your money, but if anything, if I were you, I would not support more capitalist structures and policies. I would support Pan-Africanist organizations. I would support Palestinian organizations. I would support indigenous organizations, because those organizations understand that we need to take down capitalism so that colonized people can rise up and get their land and their power back. And I don't know about you, but I don't want just African people to win. I want everybody who's had their land taken from them to win. I want Asian descent people to get their lands back. I want Irish descent people to get their land back. Anybody who has suffered from that, because that means that every single one of us is being dismissed, dehumanized, and is being degraded every single day because we don't matter, because we don't have power, because land equals power. Everyone knows that. When you have control of your land, people will respect you, because you get to determine how things are taking place, how they're operating. You get to determine how the resources are spent. All of that is based on people knowing, oh yeah, they have that. They can determine that. They're making this decision as we speak. And the same goes true when you don't have access to your land and your power. So I think it's important to note that we are disorganized on so many levels. And a lot of that can be attributed to capitalism and imperialism. We're disorganized mentally because we don't even know who we are. And so therefore, that continues to perpetuate the ideology of being powerless. And then I would also say, you know, Africans have so much power because we have done so much. Colonization, for the most part, has had to work really hard with us because we worked so hard. But a lot of that has been based on people having a higher political education to understand that we could do something about it. Many of us don't even have an amount of what we all need to have. And so if some of us are doing the research and increasing our PE, but not all of us are doing it, then we're still at a disadvantage. So we need to think in more context about that. I also would argue that the best solution that we can do is to increase our political education, because that is going to increase our self-efficacy and our self-esteem. And if we increase our self-efficacy, then we as a collective will believe that this can happen. And then that means we individually, from a self-esteem standpoint, can believe that this can happen. And that's going to help all of us feel more empowered, which will empower us collectively. The last two things I will say is that organization is the only key. That's the only way this is going to work. Organization is literally the foundation for how we're going to get our land back. But that's going to come from us being more mindful and having plans, and being able to craft out ideas, being able to work together with other people, not getting angry or letting our emotions get in the way. A lot of this that I'm talking about is individualized, and we're going to have to put that in check before we come into these organizational spaces. We also need to work on our time management and our commitments, because a lot of us don't know how to devote anything past whatever the temporary time lapse is before we lose interest or we just stop being dedicated to something. So we're asking for dedication, we're asking for commitment, we're asking for honesty, we're asking for communication. These are skills that Mother Africa has bestowed to you, but yet some of us are not using those same skills to free her. That's not right. That's not right. She literally gave you these skills because she gave birth to you. You are in her and she is in you. So you can't not accept the fact that you are who you are because of Africa. This is precisely why you have to accept who you are, which is why you need to accept your identity. So I think in closing, I'll say that's going to help us get our land back once we get more organized about what we need to do. And are we saying that you have to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party? No, we've said it time and time again. We don't care if you don't join our organization. We want you to join an organization. We never said it had to be ours. In organization, any organization that is working for justice, even if you start your own organization that is working for justice, that is better than not being a part of anything at all, because not being a part of anything at all means that you are not activating yourself with other like-minded people who are also working actively to help change the conditions for colonized people. And we need as many hands on deck to achieve that goal as possible. I will close with these two examples and then I'll pass it back to my dad. And again, please donate to ALD through www.abetterworld.me. You all, we are fighting against capitalism. We're fighting against imperialism. You have Sudan, you have other parts of the world. You have children who are growing up in war zones and occupied Palestine, where all they know is hearing gunfire every hour of the day. I mean, can you even imagine that? Where they're afraid to let their fathers and their mothers leave the house because they don't know if they will see them again. You have indigenous people who are being disrespected on a day-to-day basis, as far up as the in Major League Baseballs and the football team names and things like that, but also just people not understanding the basic idea behind Unthanksgiving. Literally still not understanding to this day what that day represents. It's not a day of family and happiness. It's a day of rape and theft and land stealing and killing people. And we're celebrating that. I don't understand. I'm very confused. I am very confused. So we have all these different examples of systems of oppression, and we continue to see these examples. We see these examples through shelterless people who are on the streets. And again, the whole purpose of achieving one unified socialist Africa is asking us to hold on to our humanity, you all. We live in a system where your humanity is very frail and very vulnerable and very fragile. And if you don't do everything you can to protect it, which would help if you joined an organization that was working for justice, if you don't do everything you can to protect it, it's going to dissipate into the atmosphere and you will never get that back. And if you don't get that back, then that means you're going to be less likely to care that Africa needs to be free. If you see shelterless people on the street as we speak and you don't even acknowledge them, then you've already lost it and you need to work on getting it back, because we're not going to be able to free Africa without the humanity. That's literally the one driving force that's going to take this whole system down, because the oppressor doesn't have humanity. That's why we don't matter, you see? But if we continue to have humanity for ourselves and for other colonized people who are in our categories, then we can unite with all of them and we can take all these people down. And they're not going to be able to stop all of us. There's no way, because there are more of us than there are of them, you see? But we need to continue to have humanity with one another. We need to take down systems of oppression. We need to stop supporting capitalism. Stop supporting it. Start being anti-capitalist. Start talking about it openly. Activate yourself. Do more research on socialism. Do more research on classism. Do more research on systems that you feel are human-led and human-driven, because that's going to help us at the end of the day. And keep in mind that some of these things are still taking place to this day. We have people who are living on the streets right now and people just walking by because their cell phone conversation is more important, or the stupid TikTok video that they're watching is more important. We have people experiencing systems of oppression every single day. Patriarchy, for example. I just told my dad about an example just yesterday. I put a chair together in my office and the book page literally said, if you're a petite girl, then you should try this yourself. But if not, you might not be successful. You should go get a man. That's literally what the book said, you all. And this is 2023. This is not 1985. This is 2023. So we still have so much work to do, you all. So much work to do. And it starts by joining an organization that's working for justice and donating to African Liberation Day. Ashe.
Ashe. Obrigada. Thank you. You know, and it's interesting. We're talking about African Liberation Day coming up, my favorite time of the year. And before I get deeper into the topic of Sudan, I just wanted to go back to something you said, Shakur. You talked about African Liberation Day, our international webcast in 2022, a year ago, and young comrade Sister Deborah, who was the keynote address, who gave the keynote address. And at the time that you and we watched that together, if you recall, as you were here, I didn't know, you know, I had been on a couple of calls with young comrade Deborah, the 24-year-old that you mentioned, but I had not met Deborah before. And of course, once I went to Guinea-Bissau in January for our party Congress, I was able to meet in person and get to know young comrade Deborah and all of the other young comrades in the AAPRP and the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau as well. And I was just so inspired by them. the intensity that you talked about, you got from the presentation that Deborah gave, that wasn't just a presentation. Those young Africans were like that 24/7, 365 days a year. If it was 1 o'clock in the morning, they had that same level of intensity, focus, and commitment. And they were so inspirational to me at such young ages, being that dedicated to our people's struggle, that it really inspired me to come back and ramp up my recruitment work, which I've done, and as you know, and been able to bring in more people into the APRP here in Sacramento and continue to do that. So just want to say that the party is in good hands with you young people that are here. We're just trying to give you as much of a foundation, and the rest of our people and all justice loving people enough of a foundation as we possibly can. So let's contribute to that further by talking about the Sudan in specificity. So when you look at the Sudan, it's a country in North Central Africa. It's about 46 million people, so just short of 50 million people in the entire country. And the dominant ethnic groupings in Sudan are millions of Arabs, people classified as Arabs. There are Berbers, who are people that would more or less be classified as African or Black or Arab or some combination thereof. Nubians, who would be classified as quote unquote Black people, Daja, who would be classified as quote unquote Black people, and other smaller ethnic groupings. Now, it's important to point that out because most of what you see in the capitalist media about Sudan, it talks about the constant strife and turmoil there. And most of the time they talk about that strife and turmoil as being the result of a conflict between Arabs and Africans, quote unquote, Black people. For us, all the people are Africans, but we know a lot of you can't see that. So that's why I clarify to clarify what we're talking about. But they classify the conflict as specifically a quote unquote Black against Arab conflict. And what's happening in the Sudan, and obviously throughout all of Africa, is much deeper than that. That's what we're trying to touch on in the remaining few minutes that we have. And then just historically, Sudan descends from Nubian empires of centuries ago, right? If you read our first book on our APRP book list, is W.B. Du Bois's The World in Africa, and he talks about it in the new work study circle I have here. We just got through a section where Du Bois was talking about the Nubian empires that existed thousands of years ago during the feudal era, through the dominant slavery era and the dominant feudal era. These are dominant economic periods of history. I know, we don't know anything about that today because capitalism doesn't really educate about economics, but that's been the trajectory that the world has traveled through. And Sudan came from that period. And the reason why it's important to say all that is because in 2011, a long and bloody civil war was happening and centered in the Darfur region of Sudan, which is kind of like a central region in Sudan. If you look at the map, you see there, it's kind of like a central northern region of Sudan. Now it's a southern region, because that war led to the secession of South Sudan. So today, South Sudan, as of 2011, is a separate country in its own right. So you have Sudan today and you have South Sudan. We are two separate countries. And as Pan-Africanists, we understand the conditions dominated by neo-colonialism in Africa, dominated by imperialism, which led to all this chaos. But clearly, further balkanizing Africa is not the solution for African people. That's not, there are a lot, for a while, there are people who love to argue, well, this is what we need is more localized solutions in Africa. And how has that worked out for Africa? It's not solved a single problem. It's not done anything to solve poverty. It's not done anything to solve the quote unquote so-called refugee problem. We don't think any African in Africa is a refugee. Even Africans that come from out of Africa, they're going home in any part of Africa. So we don't accept the colonizers language and definition about that. But just again, because that's how a lot of you think, that's why we use the language just to reference so you know what we're talking about. The problem of healthcare in Africa, this quote unquote localization, multi-party approach has not solved any of these problems. So clearly that's not the solution that we need. But we want to talk about, what exactly is happening in Sudan. And these are the two military leaders who are really engaged in an oppositional fight against one another in Sudan today. And I could name them, but you should do the research and look them up for yourself. It's not really important anyway. The point is that because, if something happens to these two, they'll be replaced by two more, because that's how neo-colonialism works. But the point of it is in 2003, if you go back, the military conflict within Sudan opened up. And there were thousands killed as a result. This is before the split of South Sudan into a separate country. And there were thousands of people killed, you all. And there were hundreds of thousands of people displaced. And what we mean by that is when these conflicts break out, people in Sudan go to the neighboring countries like Chad or Morocco or, or Niger or these neighboring countries who barely have the infrastructure and cannot even provide for their own people. So then when they have hundreds of thousands of people coming into their territories, it just makes for a monumental human disaster when this happens. So that's what was happening around the time of 2011 when the country split. And at that time that happened, that South Sudan split, Sudan came under military rule. And so what's happening now is that these military leaders are fighting for control of the country. And the previous slide that Shakura had, you saw a picture of Sudanese youth flying the Sudanese flag. And the reason why they were doing that is that they were protesting wanting to bring into existence civilian governance in the Sudan. And these military leaders that you see here are fighting dramatically to keep that or postpone that from happening. And the reason why they're doing that is the classic example of what neo-colonialism is. We've defined it many times, and we'll continue to define neo-colonialism because we understand the problem. We're in a capitalist society where they've normalized everything capitalist to the point where most of us don't even believe that there can ever be anything that exists outside of the realm of the capitalist system. We don't even really understand what capitalism is. So we have to constantly provide these definitions, and that's what we're here to do. So these military leaders, the reason why they're fighting to gain or sustain control in Sudan is that the way the neo-colonialist system is set up, once you become positioned the way they are, leadership in the country, then you become the person, or the people that work with you become the people who own and control all of the aid that comes into the country from imperialist countries. And you can disseminate that as you desire. And as long as you disseminate it in a way that represents the interests of those imperialist countries, they'll continue to provide those resources to you. And so that puts you in a position where you can live a lavish and comfortable lifestyle. And all you have to do is repress the masses of people so that they are not in a position to rise up and take power back. Because if they do that, that'll prevent imperialism from exercising its agenda in the country. So a neo-colonialist leader is only focused on maintaining control so that the interests of imperialism can be carried out in that territory. And the reward for doing that is the neo-colonialist leader is provided a comfortable lifestyle, Rolls Royces, money, bank accounts in Switzerland, and all of these corrupt things that define neo-colonialism. And these people you see on the screen, that's what their objective. And really every leader in Africa, that's what they're doing. That's what the entire system of neo-colonialism represents. And so this conflict today should be seen and as what it is. Again, just since April 15th, hundreds of people have been killed in this conflict, this power between these military leaders to gain control of the country. And as we said, hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced to the neighboring countries, which creates a humanitarian crisis for really all of North Central Africa. And the conflict between these military opponents is, like I mentioned, it's really based in their unwillingness to surrender their power, their neo-colonial power, which is what they would be called upon to do to have civilian elections. Now, of course, most often, even when you have civilian elections in Africa and civilian governments are elected, they still operate under the neo-colonial model that I've just defined for you. So this is not a solution either, just to have elections. The capitalist countries like the United States, they'll tell you, and a lot of you will believe it because you don't know any better, they'll tell you, well, the issue is that there need to be elections there. They need to have democracy, because you've been trained that just being able to cast a vote equals democracy. And we don't have a sophisticated understanding of politics. So we don't understand, like, even in the capitalist United States, you can vote all day. You can vote 50 times a day. You still don't have any power in this society. How can I say that? Because we still have you vote, vote. We still have mass incarceration. You vote, vote. We still have expanding houselessness in every city in this backward empire. You vote, vote. We still have white supremacy. We still have police agencies shooting us down like dogs. We still have the US military engaging in mercenary actions, slaughtering and dominating the world's population. So you vote, and you have not been able to do a damn thing to stop any of that I just named from happening. So you don't have democracy in this backward empire. I don't care how much you watch MSNBC or CNN or Fox or CIA, and they tell you that you have democracy. You don't have a damn thing here. What you have is a capitalist system whose only interest is in maintaining the interests of multinational capitalist corporations, and they only provide this voting process for you so that you can rubber stamp their agenda. That's really what it's all about. And so this is no different in other parts of the world like Sudan. It's just about controlling the masses of the people, but at least I would argue that the people in Sudan are more advanced and progressive than the people in the United States of America, because they're standing up and resisting. That's what the turmoil is about. They're struggling to gain the power that they know they deserve. Although these people that you see on the screen are fighting to prevent that from happening, the people all over Africa are struggling to gain that control. People here aren't struggling to do a damn thing except get an ice cream cone, watch the Lakers play the Denver Nuggets, sit out there and pass gas and eat food and sit on the toilet. That's all people here are struggling to do. People in Sudan are struggling for a better life. So this is how the system operates. Imperialism depends upon the resources in Africa to ensure the multinational corporations have what they need to maintain control. And to make you a sellout to that system, they give you crumbs so that you have cable and Wi-Fi, even though our children in the Congo die every day so that you can have it. You don't give a damn about that. All you care about is that your signal is secure so that you can watch the damn Lakers play basketball. And that's how the system works. And that's how it's able to continue to work. And so the forces at play in this conflict in the Sudan, there are a number of forces. So first, there are a number of Arab militia groups. And these Arab militia groups are tied to what used to be called, during the conflict around 2011, the Janjaweed militia. That's what they called themselves. And so these Arab militias today are, descendants or reincarnations of the Janjaweed. And the Janjaweed militia groups grew out of elements in Sudan who were loyal to the Sudanese government before 2011 against the various Sudanese ethnic groupings that we previously mentioned, a lot of who made up the Sudanese People's Liberation Front, the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement. That's what that's about. And South Sudan, when it split, it was primarily derived of the people I just mentioned, the ethnic groups, the Sudanese People's Liberation Front, and the former people that represented the Janjaweed or the Arab militias were the people who maintain power in Sudan. And now what's happening is that they decided that they're falling out. They want to make the definition of who has power even more narrow so that they can further secure their neo-colonial position. That's what's happening. But again, you should not see this simply as a conflict between Arabs and Africans or quote unquote Black people. This is a conflict between the masses of humanity and neo-colonialism. This is a conflict between the masses of humanity and imperialism. You can't just say, well, it's a conflict between Arabs and Black people, because then the next question I would ask you, well, then how do you define the conflict in the Congo? How do you define the conflict in Tanzania? How do you define the conflict in Nigeria, in Niger? How do you define what's happening in Burkina Faso and Mali and Senegal today? There's no Arabs in power in any of those countries. All of the people in power look just like us. Their skin is quote unquote Black. So how do you define that? So clearly, the problem cannot be defined in Sudan as just simply Arabs against Black people. Clearly, this is a struggle of the masses of humanity, just like all the other places I named, and neo-colonialism against neo-colonialism and imperialism. And as long as we refuse to come to understand that, because we have some sort of racial insecurity, some sort of racial constructed insecurity, which prevents us from seeing the world as it actually is instead of how we want it to be, then we'll never be able to make the collective progress to resolve any of these problems. So let's talk about the real deal in Sudan today. And, you know, Kwame Nkrumah in 1965 wrote the book Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. I'm not going to define, we define all of these things all the time. So if you don't know what they mean, you got work to do. You got work to do. Because all day, every day, people disagree with me on everything I say, and they don't even understand what these things mean. You're not qualified to disagree. Go back and do your homework, then come back and talk to us. We're not going to waste our time. It's like, again, I use the same example every time. It's like me arguing with a person who is a woman, identifies as a woman who's born children, and I'm arguing with this person about what it's like to bear children. I'd look like a damn fool. Well, that's what you look like, arguing against neo-colonialism and imperialism. And you don't even know what those things are. You've never experienced, you don't study them. You don't know anything about it. All you know is what they taught you in civics, which is absolutely worthless. And what they tell you on MSNBC and CNN and Fox and CIA, which is even more worthless than what you learned from Mr. Snodgrass in that worthless ass civics class you took in school. So Nkrumah wrote this book in 1965. You should read it, not by yourself, because you won't understand it, because you don't have a foundation. You got to get into an organization and study this material. So if you do that, it'll help you understand what these crazy people on Our Ancestors' Voices are talking about. Because not even a year after Nkrumah released this book, his government was overthrown in Ghana. And if you think that's a coincidence, I have some swampland in the Caribbean Sea that I want to sell you. But we will say, just to close out the rest of this, that the real deal in Sudan, in terms of understanding it, is that these military generals fight for power in Sudan, which of course, as we've outlined here, is the usual neo-colonial script. But who is it that really benefits from this? You know, it doesn't just stop with these two clowns that were on the last slide. That's not where it stops. Who is it that really benefits from these conflicts when they arise? And when you get to the point where you can ask and answer that question, then you'll really be in a position to understand how this system works. So one important fact, we know that the oil industry, you know, that's the industry that analyzes oil, talks about the trends in the industry, predicts those trends, and talks about how oil can maintain its status as one of the major production industries on the planet Earth. So there's an entire oil industry, just like there's the industry for all of these resources that they steal from us every day. They steal from Africa every day. So the oil industry analysts, they've identified since the mid 1990s, y'all. You can look it up yourself. They've identified that Sudan has real organized oil refining capabilities. One article that I read years ago, the oil analyst was talking about the oil there is so pure, quote, you can almost stick your hand in the ground, grab the oil, and put it into a car. And if you know anything about the oil refining industry, you know that the least money the oil refining industry has to spend on refining, the more profitable that industry is. So they're always looking for oil sources that require the least amount of refining, because that's where all their equipment is required, all the skilled people to work it, the oil rig apparatuses. That's where a lot of that needs to happen. And so this is why Sudan came into their radar. So it's not a coincidence that at that time, the mid-90s, that's when these conflicts really began to escalate. And this is for all you people that are still on this dumb narrative, it's blacks against Arabs. That's for you people, because that's when this conflict really began to escalate. Why? Because all of these folks that we talked about, the Arabs, the Berbers, the Nubians, the Danja, all those folks have been living in relative peace in Sudan for thousands of years. You cannot refute that statement. For thousands of years, they did that. Going back to communal times, up through the Nubian Empire that we talked about, they did that. You have no record of any of the type of violence between these groups that's occurred over the last 30 years. You have no record of that before that. So what precipitated this? Because these oil analysts responding to these reports have gone into Sudan and begin to drill all over the country to find these high quality oil, these places where they could get this oil. And because they're doing this, this has reduced the section of the land that the people have to live on, farm on, and live for themselves. And this has pushed them closer together, which has exacerbated the conflicts on the ground in Sudan. And this is the classic example of imperialism and neo-colonialism, and the reason why these conflicts happen. It's no different for those of you in places like Europe or Canada or the United States. It's no different than how gentrification or land grab works here. What do? They push poor people, African people, indigenous people into community. They push them so close together that conflicts arise. The conflicts are exacerbated by the supply of things that exacerbate conflict, like drugs and guns. You know, Zionist Israel produces the Uzi submachine gun, and you can find more Uzis in African parts of the world than you can in Zionist Israel. I'm talking about Port-au-Prince, Haiti. There's plenty of Uzis. I'm talking about Johannesburg, Azania, South Africa, plenty of Uzis. I'm talking about Los Angeles, California, United States, plenty of Uzis. I'm talking about the Dominican Republic, plenty of Uzis. So this is how they do it. And they exacerbate these conflicts. And when the people are conflicting each other, then as Dr. Khalid Muhammad said years ago, they sit back and say, oh, look at what those people are doing. They can't get along with each other. That's the same thing happening in Sudan. It was the same thing happening in Rwanda. I love Don Cheadle, but that movie Hotel Rwanda was trash. It's the same thing that happens all over Africa. And we have to get serious about understanding this and stop being so satisfied to be so damn stupid about what's going on in the world. Because if we allow ourselves to continue to be so dumb about what's going on in the world, at this stage, it becomes our fault what's happening. It becomes our fault. And although it's not true that people around the world hate people in this country, that's not true, but it should become true. Because we then become responsible for the suffering that people are forced to endure, because we refuse to open our eyes, because it's going to interrupt our ability to see LeBron play Jokic in the Western Conference Finals. I mean, it's a damn shame. And I love basketball. I'm not saying you can't, he said I can't watch basketball. Stop letting those rocks rattle around in your damn head. That's not what he's saying. What I'm saying is that cannot be so much of your focus that you turned a blind eye to what's happening in the world. That's what we're saying. And so neo-colonialism 101, pit the forces against one another and provide covert and overt support to specific forces to ensure imperialist interests are sustained for years and years and years. Whether it's Sudan or South LA, it's the same tactic. And why should they change it? Because you all are so happy to ensure that it continues to work. They have no reason to change it. If I was them, I would keep it the same tactic for the next 1,000 years, as long as you keep falling for it. Repress the masses of people while using the country's limited resources to make itself readily available for imperialist exploitation. Make sure the Sudan is available for mass oil drilling. And all the people there, they just got to get the hell out the way. That's their agenda, you all. And so this is why we say the same thing we always say: Pan-Africanism is the solution. We have to organize ourselves, drive those damn pirates out of the Sudan, out of all of Africa and all the resources they're stealing, and make it so that we can control those resources. Then we will have the functionality so that we don't have to beg these people for jobs anymore. We control the industries that come from the same place that we come from. That's what we're talking about when we talk about Pan-Africanism. That's what we need, and that is exactly what we're going to get. And so we're thankful to you for joining us. We hope that you really got at least a snapshot understanding of what's happening in Sudan. We encourage you to study it deeper beyond capitalist media sources. And we invite you to come back next week on May 4th. We have the wrong date there. We apologize. On May 20th. Sorry, May 21st. Now, a week from today, May 21st. Today is May 14th. On May 21st, we're going to be talking about, as Shakur said, African Liberation Day. So join us as we talk about why African Liberation Day is an institution for our liberation and freedom, and an institution that helps us organize our people for justice and forward progress. So join us and help us prepare by taking a picture, being a part of our picture campaign. Take a picture with the theme. The theme is right there on the screen. Imperialism and neo-colonialism must be destroyed. Africans stand ready for revolution. So if you're African, take a picture. If you're not an African, take a picture with that theme and just say, I support African Liberation Day. What is so wrong with that? And send them in to our website. The address there is africanliberationday.net. Send them in there. We would love to get those from you. We're posting them. We want people all over the world. People are inspired. People in Africa see the pictures of people over here. People in Europe see the pictures of people in Africa. We see pictures of people in Africa. Go to africanliberationday.net and you see all the pictures. It's a wonderful thing. Buy stuff at our website, the Forward Ever Shop. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, aprp-intl.org. Donate for African Liberation Day. We're trying to get to at least $500 US from this show, and we're almost there. So please help us get there. Go to betterworld.me and make a donation to help us do that. And support Hood Communist. It's a revolutionary African collective, and it's very essential. So please support that. Support all of our programs. Continue to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Please, please, please buy it. Tell people about it. Put it in your local library. Do something to help us spread the word. We need your help with that. Please help. And please plan to attend our International African Liberation Day webcast on May 25th. The flyer is on the screen there. Go to the site, africanliberationday.net. All the information is there for not only the webcast, but all the African Liberation Days that are happening on the ground all over the African world. So we want to ask you to please do that. Please support those activities. Very, very, very important. The donations you give will help us fund all of our on-the-ground activities. And as Shakur said, translation is essential. And we translate in several languages for our webcast. So we appreciate all of your donations to go towards those those expenses that we have. So we appreciate you very much. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you gained something today. We hope that you're inspired. We hope that you have a great rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never, you all. Stay strong. Don't be discouraged. Victory is on the horizon. Enjoy your Sunday.